Hello everyone, so I want to do two little face demos that are a little bit more in scale with maybe what size you're rendering in. I know sometimes it can be a little intimidating to shrink down to such a small scale, but also with a little less dramatic lighting than maybe I tend to do, since I know some of you prefer a little bit more of a monotone effect. So, monotone lighting effect. First thing I'm going to do is use a little bit of local color to just block these in. I like to leave my highlights till last. You can tell I've done this in pen so that there's as little smudging as possible, and still halfway through this I get smudgy from a pencil line. So I know when working smaller that becomes even more of a challenge. So keep that in mind and try to erase out your lines and get your pen lines down as much as possible. Another thing that happens in this one is that, I think I've mentioned this before, I do not have a fantastic set of pinks in my repertoire of markers, so my pinks are pretty vibrant. I'm going to end up laying those down pretty early because I know that the more I go over that area with other colors, the more washed out that underlying marker is going to get. So whatever you lay down in the initial pass, especially if it's darker, is going to slowly get bleached with each pass. So that is my warning. I'm using a little bit of a warm gray to already do some slight shading and things in the hair, and then we will bop back into some skin. So each of these faces is about the size of my thumbprints. We're going to do this one in marker, and then the second one we'll do in colored pencil. So this is that pink. Like I said, it's real bright. It is real bright. But I'm going to lay it down. I like to bounce it in a couple areas where there's going to be warmth. I'm going to very quickly try to catch the edges of it with my blending marker and let it soften up a bit. But when doing skin tones, even if you're going for like a more well-lit white light effect on the skin tones, remember that we have, blood under our skin. We have areas where blood pools and it becomes warm. We often have areas that come across as more yellow, either because of light or because there's less blood there. So it's those little variations in skin tone that really help things feel real. You don't always have to go for, like the gray shadow. It can be a pink shadow, like we're laying in right now. So people's undertones are all a little bit different. This source that I'm going to do right now is going to be a little bit of a peachy, a little ruddier complexion. When doing makeup, I think that unless you're making a stylistic choice to really blow out the blush, you want to keep it more kind of slanted and contouring to the face and a little less hard-edged. This one's sort of a vintage style, so it is pretty heavy, but I'm going to keep going over it, like I said, and try to catch the edges so that they soften. That is the pass where I got smudge on it. If you can't tell, I picked up some gray somewhere and it's smudged all over. It must have been the pencil lines. Now I'm going back in with the pencil to bump those in. That's probably where it came from. Well, don't do that till the end. I'm using a taupe to do the eyebrows and to add some more dimension into the hair. So you can see how much the line work does for us too, but just having a really nice underdrawing can let you have a simpler face oftentimes. I wanted a bit of winged eyeliner here. And then kind of breaking up the line of the teeth so it looks a little less cartoony. So we've got some nice different colors. There's some more yellow tones and some pinker tones, but we're going to keep bumping in and see how far we can take this. So this marker has a lot more yellow to it versus my original local base color is certainly like a more neutral pinkish peachier tone. So even though I left those highlights open, you can see that they are slowly closing in. That's going to happen. That's why I try to exaggerate them when I first put them down so that as I go over it, they don't completely disappear. But you can go through with your blending marker, and especially when we're working in light layers like this, it'll sort of bleach out a few areas for you. You can see it worked really well, especially in the forehead highlight that I was holding there. So I'm going to use a light, cool gray to do a little bit of shading here. But I think it looks a little dead. It doesn't have a lot of tone to it. It kind of looks subdued in a way that I don't love. So I'm going to also use a bit of a mauve. It's pretty pinkish purpley tone that I use a lot for my skin tones. And it brings a lot more life back into the shadow area, so it's not so weirdly gray on skin. I then use that to kind of go around and distribute the same tone into the hair so that the shadows are reflected in different places, not just in, the skin, so that the light is the same all over. So next thing we're going to work on is this portrait over here. We're going to do it in colored pencil so that there's one of each. Look at that. When I'm working colored pencil, like to lay in like my weird tones that I can see first. So the shadows in this, I'm thinking of, making sure that they're cool. So I'm going to use some purples and blues to bump in those shadows. And then there were some areas of real warmth, like we talked about, warming up the skin. So both for the blush on the side, but also little areas where the light isn't catching, it's going to come across as a little bit warmer. I'm using a bit of a goldenrod on the side of the face that's catching a lot more light, and then distributing that in touches on the other side to create balance. And then this reddish, kind of pinkish reddish color is going to help bump some of our more makeup-y choices as far as the blush goes. This is sort of a cooler brown with a very light hand, so none of this is being done with a hard hand. I'm not trying to erase any of the texture of the paper yet. I'm trying to build up lots of little colors together so that I can kind of see how they sit together before I get too far down the road. One of the reasons I like to lay in the crazier colors first rather than adding them on top is because then I don't have to be as careful with color mixing, knowing that as I go back with these other more neutral and expected skin tones, they're going to sort of fade to the background. I'm now using more pressure. I'm using a combination of a peach to kind of burnish and a pink to bring life to the skin. But right now we look a little bit like homogeneous. The skin's all kind of one color, even though we did all that work. So we're going to keep flittering back and forth to create more shadows, more areas of warmth, more balance. First, we will do the lipstick. I think I'm, still keeping a very, very light hand. I think that's one of the things, if you can, try to not entirely seal it until you're dead sure. I'm using white and pretty hard pressure right here, but it's because I know these areas, they're the right tone, they're the right thing. I'm just using the white with the pressure to kind of bring them to life, lighten them, and also flatten them. And then in the shadows and on the other side of the face is where I'm still going to focus a little bit of work. So if you can try to keep a light hand and have lots of little layers going and keep your pencils sharp because you're working in a small area, then you've got a lot more control over it. So this is a very dark brown that I'm using to do our sharpest cast shadows on the face. This one had a more directional lighting, more like a 3/4 lit. The other one was a little more straightforward, like straight on. As the skin tone deepens, usually you also want to deepen your shadows, right? So they move together the same amount of value. Now that side is more burnished, I can, that pink rosy blush flush is sitting on top of the burnish, so I can kind of very softly put that in, and it's going to look more diffused and less strong than if I had laid it in with a really hard approach where it was like scratching into the paper or scratching into the wax layers underneath it. I added a little bit of blue to warm up or to cool down my black, because my black has like a weirdly warm feeling to it when it's not put down with a lot of pressure. And then using a white to pull a couple highlights in. Another pass at burnishing just to try to really get some highlight across that brow area and down the side of the nose. You can always use a pencil or a micron or something to bump back in your really fine details. I've sharpened that white and I'm using it to get around the edges of nostrils to really catch the bridge of the nose. So those areas are not sealed, even once they're burnished, you can kind of burnish back over them again if you need to. And the white will slowly lighten them, but it will never be bright. It's very subtle. Using a purple to kind of bring some of those darker shadows that we did with that dark brown a little more life, a little more blood, because they can look a little too cool toned for the series. final touches here. Eyebrows and really fixing the contrast in the hair, making sure that everything is in balance with itself, right? And there we are. So that was our one in marker, and this is what our finished one in colored pencil looks like. They are both very small. They are both in pretty quick. I mean, I think I did them in like, I don't know, half an hour, 20 minutes for both of them. So that isn't too bad. All right, hope that helps.